So I'm doing this video series about how to write fiction that sells, and I'm on the last part, which is the final battle. I've gone through these. These are kind of my 9 steps to plotting fiction that sells, loosely based on a hero's journey. There are more stages, and I think the classic hero's journey is 12 points. I've kind of boiled it down into a process that works for me. So here at the final battle, you have triumph and knowledge. It's basically, of course, where you win. If it's the first book in a series, it's a temporary defeat of the enemy, but not a final defeat of the enemy, because the antagonist has to come back in books 2 or 3. But so far in the story, they've never really been able to defeat the antagonist. At the final battle, they usually go into it not expecting to win, or they go into it where there's a very slim chance of winning. So they've decided to battle even though their odds are slim, even though their odds are like 1 to 100. The antagonist is still really strong. People are probably going to die. They still decide it's worth fighting for, even though it's pretty much hopeless. So that's what usually happens in the final battle. It could also be they don't go into it with any weapon that's strong enough to defeat the enemy. Or as I usually like to do it, I like to have a lot of my betrayal happen in the last chapter. So they may go into the final battle with a plan, and they may think they've got a shot, at least a chance of defeating the enemy, but then one of their allies, their close allies, betrays them, or the enemy has a super special weapon, something they didn't expect. Almost always, there's something they didn't expect that happens when they go and confront the antagonist directly. The final battle is usually the first time where there's a direct conflict between the protagonist and the antagonist, and they see each other face to face. Often, the protagonist loses in the beginning. So what often happens is, in a lot of books, especially like action thrillers, you have a scene where the protagonist is at the mercy of the antagonist. So this is when the protagonist and his forces go into the bad guy's lair to confront him, to defeat him, but the bad guy knew they were coming, so he has a trap set and he captures all of them. So all of the protagonists and the allies are chained up or helpless. So they're captured, they're put into prison. You have the scene where the bad guy gloats and he tells them their plan. He tells them, you're so stupid, I knew exactly what you were going to do. I was watching you the entire time. How could you think you could ever defeat me? That usually actually happens in the last chapter or the final battle. So it's not just, the protagonists go in and they win, because that rarely happens. To have more dramatic tension, more conflict, they go into the final battle and their hopes are dashed. The antagonist proves that he is usually not stronger, but at least more aware. He's ahead of the game because of knowledge. He has more knowledge than the allies and the protagonists. So at the final battle, that's why often you'll have the protagonist will still be the reason that they lose, and this is also true of the second plot point of The Dark Knight of the Soul. The reason that they lose is not necessarily a lack of power, it's a lack of knowledge. There was something that they didn't know, and the antagonist he wins because he knows more. He has a greater knowledge. And so in the second plot point and the final battle, the antagonist is still continuing to win, but he's also revealing more and more of the backstory or the details. So the protagonist is filling in those blank spots. So he's learning more and more. So he learns. This is why a lot of the plot twists happen at the second plot point of the final battle, because the protagonist learns, for example, who his parents really were, or who his lost brothers or sisters really were, or he really is. Like in Star Wars, you finally have Luke going in to confront Darth Vader, and Darth Vader's big revelation is that he's actually Luke's father. So that totally changes the entire narrative. You completely screw up all of the story that, like, the whole book, the protagonist through the whole book is trying to find himself. They're trying to find truth. They're trying to find answers, who they are, what they should do. They think they've realized who they are. They think they found their friends. They think they know which side is right or wrong. So at the midpoint, they've chosen a side and they've decided to become a warrior for one side or the other. And at the second plot point or final battle, they realize something that completely changes their perspective about everything. So it's very difficult for them to push forward or defeat the antagonist because the antagonist has messed with their minds and revealed something that they didn't know before. Somebody betrayed them. Something they thought they knew was wrong. So this final battle, it's not really just one battle scene. It's usually like the last few chapters. And usually they go in to fight against the antagonist, to stop the antagonist. Something else is revealed that they didn't know. The antagonist wins and holds them captive. So he takes their friends away. He takes the protagonist. And they're all probably prisoners, so that the antagonist can reveal all of the knowledge, so that the protagonist can learn something, because the reason that they always lose is usually a lack of knowledge. So the final battle where they finally triumph over the antagonist, it's a result of knowledge. So they fill in that key missing piece that they didn't know before, and they learn that missing piece. The antagonist is okay giving it away because he has the protagonist captive. That's why he gives that speech. But now that the protagonist has all the right information, they're equally powerful. And then, of course, they escape. They escape by themselves, or they escape with some secret weapon, or one of their allies comes and saves them, unlocks the key. So now they're free again, and they have total knowledge. So they're totally capable of defeating the protagonist. So then you'll have your final battle scene. And the final battle scene, it's when the protagonist has all the weapons that they need. They have all the knowledge that they need. Often they will still fail in the beginning, but ultimately triumph simply by virtue of their determination or their will. So like the classic scene is The Matrix. And the trope that they use in The Matrix is Mr. Smith is asking Neo, why do you persist? Why do you keep fighting? Why don't you just give up? This is common not just in The Matrix, but tons and tons of movies and books. The antagonist does something like he asks the hero to join him. Why don't you just join me? It's really weird, especially because a lot of fight scenes, it's basically like the antagonist is actually just the civilizing force. So they're really just trying to provide order and governance and structure for peace, basically. Like in Star Wars and the new Star Wars, or the old ones, the Empire, all they're trying to do is create a universal law so that there's peace and stability. And the revolutionaries, they just don't want that because they want their freedom. So they're become terrorists to destroy the civilizing element. But anyway, so the antagonist is just like, why do you keep fighting? Why do you keep persisting? Why don't you just join me? I'll make you powerful. I'll make you my right-hand man. You can come over to the dark side or whatever. And they usually ask why. So the story question is, why? Why are you fighting for this thing that you're fighting for? Why don't you just give up? In the last chapter, the hero really figures out, now that they have all the knowledge, now that they have all the weapons, they really figure out their motivating principle. And often that's just, I fight because I choose to. I fight because fighting is a choice. If there was no conflict, this is kind of my PhD thesis actually, but if there was no conflict and they just followed the laws and just followed the rules, there would also be no sense of freedom. They wouldn't know that they were free. The only potential site of actual freedom is resistance to the civilizing influence. So only when somebody tells you no, you have to conform, you have to follow these rules, and you decide to refuse, that's the only actual genuine freedom that exists. So in making the decision to refuse and to oppose the antagonist, they're standing up for the principle of freedom, even if that's really the only thing they're standing up for. But anyway, they find themselves deciding to fight for freedom, for the freedom to choose, for the freedom of everybody's choices. And that's that's the reason they come back stronger. So usually if they have like a fight by fight battle, they're evenly matched until the antagonist asks something like, what are you fighting for? And the protagonist realizes what he's fighting for. And then with that realization, that gives him enough motivation and strength to defeat the antagonist. So that's what happens in the final battle. The beginning, they had a world with lack. In the final battle, they have all of the knowledge, all the weapons. And then what happens after, I'll finish this video with the wrap-up, which is just after the final battle, they defeat the antagonist, at least temporarily. It may not be forever, but for right now, they've won. They've defeated the antagonist. They've won the battle, which is a big thing because so far through the book, they haven't really won a battle, but they win this one. They send the antagonist away. He escapes, maybe. They know that it's not all over. They know the antagonist will be back, but for right now, they're safe and they won, so they can kind of celebrate. And then usually this will be like the last chapter, actually, like where everything is revealed. The antagonist reveals everything. The betrayal happens, so they know who's on their side or who's not on their side. And then you'll usually have a final chapter or an epilogue that wraps things up. You don't have to, but it's usually a good idea. So it just shows after the final battle, they often return to the ordinary world. So this is when they return home, they return back to the ordinary world, but now, of course, they're completely changed. They have so much more knowledge. They have a completely different viewpoint of everything. They don't want the same ways, the same things that they wanted. And I'm not sure if I mentioned it when I was going through these before, but at some point in this plotting outline, the hero usually gives up what they wanted. They wanted one thing, which was usually like to get back to the ordinary world. They had a goal. Maybe they wanted something in the beginning, and they kept trying to get back home while they go through the plot. At the midpoint, they probably gave up that goal, and they decided to pick something else. But often, there's a point of sacrifice, which could happen like anywhere in here, really. But there's often a point of sacrifice where they decide to give up that goal, their own goal. They decide they're never going to get happiness. If this is, often there's a romantic element. If you're writing young adult fantasy, there's often some romance or somebody they care about. So usually in the story, they will recognize that they're not going to defeat the antagonist. They can't win as long as they're holding on to something. So it's probably a relationship. A lot of times the antagonist will actually say, you're weak because you care about your friends. That's what makes you weak. You're weak because you care what happens to the people, because you care about good and evil. You're weak because of your morality. The antagonist will say things like that. The protagonist will either say, no, actually that makes me stronger. My compassion makes me stronger. Or they may give up something like because they're compassionate, because they care about other people, so they're willing to die for their cause. They're willing to give themselves up. They're willing to give up all their goals, all their selfishness, because they care about other people. Like the antagonist they're still motivated by personal gain. So they still will only fight to a point because they still need to see personal benefits. Whereas the hero, because he's not fighting for personal gain, because he's fighting for virtue or idealism or for these thoughts, and nothing else, the hero is willing to give up everything else, including giving up their own life and going into this final battle knowing they might die. And that's what actually makes them stronger. So that could be the final tool that helps them defeat the enemy. It's usually because they die. In a lot of books, like Harry Potter, the hero is the one who is sacrificed, but then comes back in the final battle, and that can happen in here. Or they just appear to die and then they come back. Or in a lot of other books, in mine, I think my heroes don't usually die, but I have allies that die. So the antagonist might kill or seem to kill an ally. That's what really pisses the protagonist off. Now, like, they were trying to save everybody, so they were reluctant, but now that the antagonist has done the worst and realized their worst fears and killed the person they loved, they have nothing else to lose. So now the protagonist can come back and really defeat the antagonist because they've lost everything. So that can happen. And then usually after they defeat the antagonist, they're able to still, using some power, or because maybe it's just, their ally or their love interest got thrown off a cliff, but actually he had one grip. So after they defeat the antagonist and they mourn, there's usually a scene of mourning where they'll mourn the lost ally or love interest. Then they find out that he's not actually dead. It could be the hero, it could be the love interest of the ally, but that perceived death, they either come back through accident or they come back because the ally has learned some magical power that lets them bring them back. And this could be something like, I don't know if this happens in The Wizard of Oz, I don't think so, but in something like that, they win like some wish, and they have the wish to use for themselves. Like for Dorothy, it would be the wish, they can use the wish to get back home, they can use the wish to fulfill their one goal that they've had the whole book, and then they give up that one wish actually to save their friend or their love interest. So they've changed goals and they give up what they wanted to sacrifice themselves or sacrifice their own interests to save their ally or the love interest. That's usually something that really happens in commercial fiction a lot. So it could be a great way to wrap up the final battle. Anyway, I hope this outline works. I'm going to post a PDF of this book, which is the plot dot, and I'll also post the chapter outline template that I use when I start mapping out my fiction. I'll put links somewhere so that you can find them. Those might help if you're plotting your book. I'm a strong advocate of plotting books. I think it makes it a lot easier to finish books and also to finish books that sell, that are going to be really strong and resonate with readers. So I hope this video series helps. If so, leave a comment or share with any of your writing friends, and I appreciate that. Thanks, bye-bye.